Hi, welcome to Everglades National Park. We're here in sunny Florida today, and we're here to celebrate a couple special things.
Happy Earth Day and Happy National Park Week.
That's right. My name's Allison Gant, and I'm a park ranger here at Everglades National Park.
And my name's Nadir Jackson. I go to the Boys and Girls Club of Philadelphia, Germantown unit.
All right. Okay, and before we get too far in our show, we need to take a few minutes to thank our sponsors.
Ball State University, Macy's, National Park Foundation, and National Park Service.
Right on. Thanks, Nadir.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So, Allison, where is the Everglades?
Well, Everglades is Everglades National Park, and we're located all the way in Florida at the very southern tip of the peninsula. We're about 1.5 million acres, which makes us the third largest national park in the lower 48 states. And we're located between Miami, Naples, and the Florida Keys.
Okay. How can you interact with this program?
Well, kids in the classroom can definitely interact with us today. There's 3 ways they can do that. Number 1, they can call in, and you should see the number on your screen there. We'd love to take your questions. We'll have 3 chances to do that during the show. And you can also go online to our bank of experts that's standing by here at the park, and they can really answer your questions. And the 3rd way that you can participate is to join in the Your Turn activities that are going to be happening here in the park, and you can do the same activities in your classroom. Okay, and just a reminder, we are celebrating Earth Day today, and we hope we're going to give you a few tips on how to do that.
Today is Earth Day, which means we should be celebrating, right? I think I can give you a few ideas. First, you're watching this Earth Day electronic field trip. Nice work. Second, visit your local Macy's store or national park to pick up our great Kid Power coloring book. It'll even give you some pointers on how to protect our environment. Third, when you finish that coloring book, take it back to Macy's to pick up a special Kid Power patch. So there you have it, a few great ways to celebrate Earth Day this year. Now back to our celebration.
Okay. Just a reminder, you can get that Kid Power activity book in Macy's stores today while supplies last. And you can also get it in national parks or online at nationalparks.org. What you're going to want to do is color in the back page and turn it into a Macy's store this coming Saturday or Sunday, the 26th or 27th, to receive a special Kid Power patch. And again, while supplies last. Okay. So maybe we need to talk about who else is joining us today, right?
Yes, who else is joining us today?
All right, over at Your Turn Central, I believe we have Flo, Peter, and Devontae. And then out on the Gumbo Limbo Trail, waiting for us, is Greg and April. Okay. And before we go any further, we do have a very special message from Mrs. Laura Bush, the First Lady, who was here to visit us just 2 months ago in February.
We're all enjoying this live electronic field trip from Everglades National Park today, but plans for this visit have been in the works for a long, long time. In fact, someone very special helped kick things off over 2 months ago.
There's no better place to experience America's national splendor than in our national parks.
First Lady of the United States, Laura Bush, visited Everglades National Park to speak with students and community members about the importance of our national treasures. In her role as honorary chair of the National Park Foundation, Mrs. Bush encourages all of us to pay a visit to our national parks.
We especially want young people to get to enjoy the beauty and the pleasures of nature. Today, like Mary said, video games and television and the internet are competing for children's attention.
Today we'll be learning much more about native and invasive species in the Everglades and throughout our nation. Part of Mrs. Bush's preservation message for our national parks is understanding the importance of preserving native species.
Everglades National Park is known for its amazing plants and birds, fish, and animals. The wetlands, forests, and estuaries around us are home to many rare and threatened species, including the Florida panther and the American crocodile. Some of the Everglades' most fascinating plants and wildlife, though, are threatened by what we call invasive species.
The health of the national parks is of great concern to the First Lady, and so today we'll follow her lead by learning about native and invasive plants and taking steps to protect our natural environment.
So Allison, before we go any further, let's take a look around the Everglades.
Sounds like a great idea, and our superintendent, Dan Kimball, will give you the tour.
Welcome to Everglades National Park. I'm Superintendent Dan Kimball. Let me show you around. The first thing a visitor may notice about Everglades National Park is that this place is wild. There are a lot of wild plants, wild animals, and wild places. In fact, you've got the entire food chain competing for survival, just a short distance away from the big city of Miami. Everglades National Park has 2 seasons throughout the year. A wet season from May to November that coincides with the hurricane season, and a dry season from December through April. This climate is subtropical, which means the plants and animals that survive in this wet-dry cycle are a mix of temperate species from the United States and tropical species from the Caribbean. Over 130 years ago, man started to dike, dam, and drain the Everglades to provide flood protection for South Florida. An unintended consequence of these actions was a negative impact on wildlife. For example, there's been over a 90% reduction in the number of wading birds in the park. However, in the year 2000, we started the largest ecosystem restoration effort in the world, and we're very hopeful that this 40-year effort will lead to a healthier and more sustainable Everglades. There's a lot more to see here at Everglades National Park. You'll have to come visit and explore more on your own.
So let's get started exploring the Everglades.
Today's electronic field trip is going to be about native versus invasive species. All right, Nadir, so since we're talking about native and invasive species, we better start off with the definition, right?
Yes.
How would you define native species?
I would define a native species as its home, its community, or its environment.
You got it. It's an animal or plant that belongs to a certain area. It's lived there, and it's lived there for a long time. And it's adapted to its natural surroundings and its environment and all the conditions it has to deal with.
So, why is it important?
Well, native plants are very important for a couple reasons. One is they provide food for the animals around them. They also, in some cases, provide shelter for animals, and they are very important to creating the habitat. Speaking of habitat, do you know what a habitat is? Or what's a good word for a habitat?
I would have to say a good word for a habitat is its home.
You got it. It's an animal's home, a plant or animal's home, actually. And there's 4 things that you must have in order to have a habitat. Do you remember what they are?
Yes. Food, water, shelter, and space. Everybody needs to have space.
That's right. Okay, so 4 things for that habitat. Excellent. Well, I think it's about time we see some of those native plants here in the Everglades.
Yes. Now let's go see to our fun pals, Greg and April.
Well, thank you, Nadir. Thank you, Alison. Hi, my name's Greg Litton. I'm a park ranger from New Zealand.
And I'm April Almaraz from one of the Boys and Girls Clubs down in Austin, Texas.
And we're in a native habitat that looks really different from where you two are. What is this place that we're in?
Well, this is a tropical hardwood hammock. It is a shady, cool, and comfortable place to hang out.
It's pretty nice, and hammock is an interesting word to describe a habitat here that's pretty high and pretty dry. And in the wet season, the hurricane season, the hammock here is still pretty dry and doesn't flood. Now I can see next to you, April, there's a fairly interesting, cool-looking tropical hardwood tree. What is that?
Well, this is a gumbo limbo, and it's also called the tourist tree because usually when people and me usually get sunburned, they start peeling, and that's what the gumbo limbo does if you rub your hand on it.
Okay, that's pretty neat, and it's a tall tree. I can see it goes all the way up to the canopy.
Yes, it might grow up to 50 feet tall.
That's a nice shade tree.
Yes.
And behind us, there's another native plant of the hammock. It's not so tall, but it's pretty cool. These leaves, well, these feel pretty strange.
Feel pretty plastic.
Yeah, and this tree here is actually a wild coffee plant. And if you come to the hammock in the right time of year, you can find little coffee seeds on it. They're bright red. You can pick them. You can dry them out, you can grind them, and this is where coffee comes from, is tropical plants like this.
Wow.
And the hammock is one of the few environments in the whole United States where we can find in this country tropical trees. So back to you, Alison and Nadir.
Great. Thanks, Greg and April. So now to understand a little bit more about natives, let's head over to your turn central for some activities with Flo, Devontae, and Peter.
Hey, this is Flo. I'm from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin, Texas. And I've got two very special friends here with me today. This is...
I'm Peter from Murray, Utah.
And this is...
I'm Devontae from Washington, D.C.
Before we start, we have a special guest.
Hi, my name is Dallas, and this is 4th grade from Campbell Drive Elementary. My class and I are going to do a special activity that we're going to do today.
Great. Thank you, Joe Dallas. And that activity, Joe Dallas, why don't you go back with your class because you're going to help us with this activity. And that activity is a game called Unwanted Guests. We're going to talk about the native plants and non-native plants and animals that live here in the Everglades National Park. So, Peter, you got some cards for us?
Oh,
You're going to show us what we're going to play with? All right. Now, everybody over back here in Joe Dallas's class has got an animal or a plant on their backs. And the object of the game is by asking a series of yes and no questions is you're going to figure out who you got on your back, okay? And Devontae and Peter are going to demonstrate. Devontae, would you show us your species on your back, please? There you go. And then Peter is going to ask Devontae.
It keeps going on and
backwards. Devontae is going to ask a series of yes and no questions to Peter, and we're going to try to figure out who Devontae has on his back. Okay, guys, get started.
Is it an animal?
yes.
Is it a mammal?
Yes.
Is it a vertebrate?
Yes.
Is it a non-native?
Yes.
Is it black?
Yes.
Can you eat it?
Yeah, can you eat it?
Yes.
Is it the feral pig?
Yes.
All right. So Devontae has the feral pig on his back. Now we're going to switch roles, and Peter's going to show Devontae his species, and Peter's going to ask Devontae a series of yes and no questions, and try to figure out who his species is. All right, guys, go ahead and get started. Devontae, or Peter, ask Devontae the questions.
Is it an animal?
Yes.
Is it a mammal?
No.
Is it a reptile?
No.
Is it a bird?
Yes.
Is it a tall bird?
Yes.
Okay, great. We figured out that Peter's species is a bird, and that's basically how you play the game. Now, if you really want to learn about your animals, get those cards a little bit ahead of time and do some background research using the internet in your school library, and then come back and give a report. Back to you, Allison.
All right. Thanks, Flo, Peter, and Devontae. That's great. All right, so we've talked about natives. Now let's talk a little bit more about invasives. Nadir, do you know what an invasive is?
No, I really don't know what invasive is. I was gonna ask you.
Oh, all right. Well, then let me fill you in. So an invasive, one part of it is that it's basically an opposite of a native. Okay, so it's not native, it's a non-native. And what that means is it really doesn't belong into an area. And invasive means that it's come into an area, not only is it new to this place, but it does really well. And there's very few natural predators for it. So it's established itself, and in a way, it's starting to invade. And that's how it gets the name invasive. Okay. All right, do you know where you can find invasive species?
I have to say everywhere.
Yeah, I think you're right, everywhere. Today, anymore, there's probably invasive species just about everywhere.
How do they get here?
Well, they get here by people, and that's the other real key thing about invasive species is that they're brought in by people. And sometimes they're brought in for decoration, like ornamental plants. Sometimes they're brought in because it's food, and it's a good food source, like fish maybe. And sometimes they're brought in because they make an interesting pet. But regardless, they usually don't belong here, and sometimes they get pretty aggressive and aren't so good for the rest of the natives that are here.
Okay, now let's go find out more about invasive plants and go see Greg and April.
Hey, thanks, Nadir. So we're still in the hardwood hammock here, and it looks pretty healthy. This looks like a good native environment, but you know, sometimes if you look close, you can see there are some plants nearby that really shouldn't be here. They're from somewhere else. And April, you look like you've got something in your hands worth sharing with us.
Yes, this is called the arrowhead vine, and it is one of the non-native and invasive plants here in the Everglades. And
so how did it get to the Everglades, do you think?
Well, people brought it here for a house plant, and somehow it got loose and started spreading all over the Everglades really fast.
Must be the climate here is pretty good for things to grow, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a has that become a big problem in the Everglades? What would that do if it got into the hammock?
Well, the day before yesterday, we went to go see them, and actually I noticed that the plant was actually choking and possibly killing the tree.
Well, that's a lot of bad news for something that's a house plant. And I have a plant here that was also brought in by people, and this plant is the Brazilian pepper, which comes from South America. And people brought this plant to Florida because it actually puts out a really nice red berry around Christmas time. So people would call it the Florida holly. And the Brazilian pepper really likes parts of the Florida area where the soil has been stirred up, maybe by farming with fertilizers added to the soil. So that disturbed area, we could call it, is a great habitat for these Brazilian peppers to come in. And those red seeds that we kind of like for Christmas time, birds like them too. They're attracted to the color, and they get spread by seeds and by the birds. Now, let's go back to you, Allison and Nadir.
All right, thanks, Greg and April. Okay, it looks like we've got an alligator cruising along out here in the Everglades, and that is definitely one of our native species, a native animal. Okay, so I think it's time to recap. What did we learn about natives and invasives?
I learned that natives belong, and I learned that invasives don't.
Okay, that sounds good to me. That's about sums it up. And let's go over to Your Turn Central and see what they learned from their activity.
Hey, Flo here again. Well, guys, what did we learn about invasives and native plants? Peter?
I learned how bad invasives are for the environment and how they hurt native plants.
And how about you, Devante?
Yeah, how invasive plants are taking more water away from the native plants.
Yeah, and we're learning that invasive species just aren't that good for the ecosystem. Back to you and Allison, Nadir.
Maddie from what?
To take this.
Okay, Maddie from Florida. It's now time to take some of your questions. So Maddie from Florida, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, my question is, I know that some plants in the Everglades are invasive, but can some that come be helpful?
That's a really good question, Maddie. Let's send that over to Greg and April on the Gumbo Limbo Trail.
Yeah, Maddie, that's kind of a hard question because there can be some non-native plants that don't do harm. But the trick is we never know whether they do harm or not do harm until it might be too late. So we should always be really careful when we think about non-native plants. And we'll send that one back now to Allison and Nadir.
Thanks, Greg. Jesse from Florida, now you're on the line. Go ahead with your question, please.
Jesse, are you there? Well,
Jesse from Florida, please go ahead with your question. Okay, I guess we've lost Jesse. Who's next? Magali from Florida.
In the Everglades.
Could you repeat that, please?
How many animals are endangered in the Everglades?
How many animals are endangered in the Everglades? There's quite a few. I can give you a couple of examples. The Florida panther is one. The West Indian manatee is another animal. There's also the wood stork, which is one of our birds, and there's quite a few others. But I'm going to suggest for an exact number, why don't you go to our bank of experts online. Thanks for your question. Okay, next up is Shanette, also from Florida. Shanette,
Hello?
go ahead.
Why is the Everglade important? Was Everglade important to the animal?
I didn't quite catch that. Why is the Everglades important to animals?
Want me to answer it?
Sure, Nadir, why don't you go ahead and answer that one?
The reason why the Everglades is important to animals is because it's their habitat. And if we didn't have animals like the American crocodile or our manatees or our woodpeckers, all these animals wouldn't be here right now.
Okay, thanks, Nadir. All right, well, with all these great calls coming in and it being Earth Day, I wonder if there's something everybody out there would be able to do to help out on Earth Day. I wonder. All right, we're ready to take a few more phone calls. Natalie, you are from Florida. You're up next. Please go ahead.
My question is, what is the least endangered species in the Everglades?
Ooh, that's a really good question. What is the least endangered species in the Everglades? Let's toss that over to Greg and April and see if they know. Otherwise, we might have to go to our bank of experts.
That's a really cool question. I think April's got a good idea.
I think that it would be the gumbo lumbo. Back to you, Allison.
Well, Jared from Minnesota, you're on the line. Go ahead with your question.
In the Everglades. Let's toss that over to Greg and April and see if they...
Jared, could you turn down your TV and then ask your question again?
Are you there? Greg? Next.
Oh, are the Everglades fresh or salt water? Wow, that's an excellent question. The area that we're standing in right now, Nadir, is which?
It is salt water, and the reason, it is fresh water, and the reason why it's fresh water because only alligators swim in fresh water.
Okay, but there are sections of the Everglades where the fresh water mixes with the salt water, and that creates brackish water, and then a little chunk of the park also has salt water in it too. But the majority of the Everglades is going to be fresh water. Great question. Okay. All right, that's all our calls for right now, but keep phoning in. We'll have 2 more chances to ask some questions. And right now, we're going to talk a little bit more about invasives, but also habitat restoration.
Well, I know that invasive plants are bad for the native plants, but are the invasive plants bad for the ecosystem?
Yes, they are, Nadir. That's a really good question. Native invasive species are bad not only for the native plants and animals, but they can be bad for the entire habitat and eventually the ecosystem because they do such a great job of surviving and spreading.
So how do they survive? How do they fight for survival?
Well, they're able to fight for survival. They compete with the other native plants and animals that are here, and sometimes they're a little more aggressive, and they do really well at fighting for things like sunlight, water, food, shelter in some cases, and even good soil. All right. Well, that's certainly gives us an idea of some of the negative impacts of invasives. So let's go find out from Greg and April some more specifics.
Yeah, that's right, Allison. Invasives can be really, really bad because their home, where they're normally from, they can be different plants and animals like parasites or deer that kind of keep those plants under control, would stop them from spreading. But here's a really good example of a plant from Australia, actually, that was introduced to Florida to kind of dry up the wetlands so people could build cities. And this happened about 50 years ago, but the tree called the melaleuca was brought to South Florida. And in Australia, it's normally a small tree, but here it got out of control. It's like 50 foot tall, and one of the pines, one of the seeds can have like 1 million little seed pods. And you wouldn't believe how humans spread the seed on purpose. By aeroplane.
That sounds a very unusual way to spread seeds.
It's unusual, and we really regret doing that. Because what's happened now is, because these are thirsty trees, can you imagine what's happened to the habitat?
Well, a lot of the wetlands have been turned into forest because the trees have been soaking up a lot of the water, and what can happen is animals can die and some plants also if there's no more water.
Yeah, the natural habitat has been taken over by this very aggressive, invasive tree called the melaleuca. That's just one more example for you, Allison.
Great, thanks Greg and April. That's an incredible story about the melaleuca. All right. Okay.
Oh. So we're gonna see how our friends Devontae, Flo, and Peter are doing to help us understand the impact of invasives at Your Turn Central.
Hey, welcome back to Your Turn. We're going to play another game now, and it's called Going, Going, Gone. We've already talked a little bit about how invasive species impact the native species. Now we're going to see some real-life situations and how those might affect the species. Devontae and Peter both have cards that depict a species that occurs here in the Everglades. Devontae, what species are you?
I am a fox squirrel.
And what are some of your characteristics? Tell us a little bit about fox squirrels.
I am endangered. I live on cypress trees and sometimes nest in bromeliads.
Bromeliads, yeah. And Peter, what are you?
I am a pine jacquemontia.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am very rare. I am a very rare plant. I need sunlight to grow, and I live only in pinelands.
Okay. Now each of these guys has 5 tokens, and those represent survival factors, and I'm going to read from a list of threats, and for every threat that affects each one of them, they're going to put down a token and give it over to me, and we'll see how that all works out. So you ready? Everybody ready with the class? All right, let's go. All right, first one. A tree called Melaleuca, we just heard about those, didn't we? Grows uncontrollably and quickly converts open sawgrass prairies into a dense, closed forest. Closed forest. That would be you, Peter. All right.
I lose one because I need sunlight to grow.
Absolutely. Okay. Devontae, come on, stand up, stand up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Let's see here. Brazilian pepper is introduced and begins to grow and reproduce rapidly. These new invaders eventually shade out smaller plants.
I need sunlight to grow, so.
Oh, we're in trouble. How many survival tokens we got left? 3. You're getting close to trouble. Okay, here's another one. Because there's only so much money to go around, funds that fight the growth of exotic plants take away money from programs to save endangered species. Who gets infected there or affected there? Both of you. That's right. Both the fox and the jacquemonda. What have we got going on? How many tokens have you got left, Peter?
2.
What does that mean?
That means I'm in trouble.
Peter's in trouble. How are you doing over there, Devontae?
Good, because I still have 4 tokens.
All right. Let's see here. The thick growth of both aquatic and terrestrial exotic plants in our canals and wetlands stymies the flow of much needed water to the Everglades. Who gets affected? And there you have it. Okay, so we've got the jacquemonte that's in a little bit of trouble. How many tokens have you got?
1.
1. And Devontae, how about you? You're doing okay?
Yeah.
All right. I think you can see now that there can be some real impacts on plants and animals that live in the Florida Everglades. Back to Allison and Nadir.
All right, thanks Flo, Peter, and Devontae. Great activity. All right, so now that we know a little bit about invasives and their impact on our native habitats, what do you think we can do to fix it, Nadir?
The first step, I think that we can get rid of the weeds of the invasive, and the second step, I think that we can plant more natives and let them grow through the forest.
That's a great idea, and that's exactly it. We call that habitat restoration. And you had a chance to do a little bit of that the other day, didn't you?
Yes, when we pulled out the weed of the arrowhead vine.
That's right. So we pulled it out. We didn't have time to go back and plant natives, but maybe some other folks will be able to follow up on that.
Okay.
So where in the country do you think that habitat restoration is taking place?
I would have to say everywhere.
Yes, you're probably right. There's a lot of different restoration projects going on all around the country. Okay. And to get and maybe the folks at home or on their classrooms can take a good look and investigate a little bit about where habitat restoration is going on near them. Okay.
Yes.
Let's hear a little bit more about habitat restoration in Everglades National Park with Greg and April.
Well, thanks, Allison. Thanks, Nadir. You know, here at the Everglades National Park, we've got one of the world's largest restoration efforts beginning just a few miles away from here. Picture an area surrounded by native plants, but in the middle, there's a problem area that needs restoration. It's a restoration area with a cool name. It's called the Hole in the Donut.
It's a pretty funny name. Usually in the Hole in the Donut, the Brazilian pepper took over 6,500 acres of land. And the way we used, the things we used to get rid of all the trees are bulldozers and tractors and a lot of other heavy machinery.
So that's a lot of work to get rid of the invasive plant, right? So how did it go?
It didn't go too well because a lot of the seeds were still in the soil, and so what we had to do was get some grinders and then grind it all down until it was only rock, so there wouldn't be no more Brazilian pepper growing.
So that's a lot of heavy machinery to scrape away the soil?
Yes, it is.
So how does that area look now?
well, all the plants and a lot of the animals are coming back, so it's doing real well.
Great, great. And you know that hole in the donut restoration area, it started in 1997, so that's 11 years on. And there's about 4,000 acres of the hole in the donut now that's restored, and that's good news. So Allison, back to you.
Thanks, Greg and April.
Let's recap what we learned about habitat restoration.
And invasives, you got it. All right, so it sure does sound like habitat restoration can be a difficult process and take a long time to do. So, and our invasives can have a pretty negative effect. Let's see how the folks at Your Turn Central, what did you guys learn?
Hey, Allison, I think we were learning some pretty interesting things about invasive species. Peter, what'd you learn today?
I learned some of the effects that invasive species have on native plants and animals.
How about you, Devontae? What'd you learn today about invasive species?
That they're taking too much water from the Everglades and the plants and the animals.
Yeah, and I learned too that if we don't really pay attention to these species that are coming in and taking over habitat, our native animals and species plants are going to be gone. So we need to take care. Back to you, Allison and Nadir.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate your recap. Okay, so we're ready to take some of our callers, and I believe waiting for us on the line is Jake from Georgia. Jake, please go ahead with your call.
How many invasive species are there in the Everglades?
That's a great question, Jake. How many invasive species are there in the Everglades? Well, there's quite a few, and some of them are really doing quite a number on the Everglades. I can think of probably 6 really invasive plants, and then quite a few invasive animals and insects. But to get a really excellent answer, I suggest you go online to our bank of experts that are standing by here in the park. Okay, next up, we believe we have Jesse from Nevada, and you're on the line. Please go ahead with your question.
I'm Jesse. Are the animals endangering the plants or vice versa? The native plants?
Okay. Jesse, thanks. That's an interesting question. Are the animals endangering the plants and vice versa? Well, I'm going to say that the native ones are working pretty much in balance like they have for many years. It's the invasive ones that do come in, and certainly invasive animals may endanger some of the native plants, as well as some of the invasive plants may endanger some of the native animals. Great question. Okay, so again, really, Nadir, it's Earth Day. There's just got to be a couple more things that folks can do out there. What do you think? Okay. All right, well, those are some good ideas. I hope you guys will get a chance to try those out at home. I believe we're ready for a few more questions, and Karen, you are up next on the line. Please ask your question.
Please ask your question. How do they survive in the life cycle? How do they survive in the life cycle?
I only heard part of that. Can we try it again? And maybe you can turn down your TV.
How do the animals survive in the Everglades?
How do the animals survive in the Everglades? Okay, I think we got it now. The animals survive in the Everglades pretty much, I would have to say, almost the same way we manage to survive in life. Okay, we look for food, we find shelter, and we find water. And the animals that are out here are pretty well adapted to their environment with a lot of different interesting characteristics that help them to be able to survive. Like the alligator, for example, has nice, tough skin. Okay, thanks for your question. Next up is Tim from Nevada. Tim, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah.
Tim, you may need to turn down your monitor and try asking your question again, please. Wow, great question. How many Florida panthers are left? Well, in all of South Florida, we're now saying there's about 100 Florida panthers left, which is actually doing pretty well. But in Everglades National Park itself, there's probably about 10 or 12 panthers. Thanks for your question. Hannah, you're up next from Nevada. please go ahead and ask your question.
I am from Dutch Middle School now, and my class is wondering what is the most popular activity.
Ooh, the most popular kind of tree in the Everglades. Let's head over to Greg and April for that one.
Well, what's the most popular type of tree? Well, I think people really like the gumbo limbos. They provide a lot of shade, and maybe the oak trees that have a lot of Spanish moss kind of hanging off their branches. It's pretty cool around here, huh?
Very.
Back to you, Nadir.
Thanks, Greg and April. Let's see who's next on our call list. Danielle from Florida, please go ahead and ask your question now.
How many species of snakes are there in the Everglades?
Ooh, how many species of snakes are there in the Everglades? Do you know this one, Nadir? Or should I answer?
I might know, but if I'm right, can I be sure there is 15 types of species of snakes in the Everglades?
That's close, but it's actually 26 species of snakes that we have in the Everglades. But not to worry, only 4 of those are the venomous kind. Okay. All right, so that's our last caller for right now. Okay, next up, since it's Earth Day, I think we really need to spend some time talking about stewardship. So stewardship is a pretty big word. Nadir, do you have a good idea what stewardship is?
Helping your environment.
You got it. It's helping out. It's taking care of something. And sometimes, and do you know where you might be able to, students around the country can go to do stewardship?
At your local park, here at the Everglades, or in your backyard or at your garden.
That's a great idea. Okay. So you may have a local park or a national park near you, or it may be a community organization that does some things to help the environment. And that's definitely one way that you can be a steward. You can also, if you visit a national park, you can also sign up ahead of time to be a volunteer and find some ways to help be a steward as well.
Now, for talking about being a good steward, let's go see what Greg and April are doing.
Yeah, thanks, Nadir. Yeah, every visitor who comes to a national park, I think, is a steward because they care about it, they visit it. But you know what, stewardship can be one person doing one thing at a park or a lot of people doing other things. And April, you've got some pretty cool ideas about stewardship.
Well, one thing you can do to help the environment is you can pick up litter at some of the parks. You can ask your principal, maybe if you can start a program, maybe after school, planting gardens, native plants, and native trees.
That's really cool. So you're getting involved with the schools to help out. That sounds a lot like the First Bloom project, which was introduced just last year by First Lady Laura Bush to get students into the outdoors, planting native plants, and if I'm not mistaken, you've been a big part of that, haven't you?
Yes. What we'll do is learn about a lot of native plants, non-native plants, and invasive plants. What we did was make 6 plants, 6 cups of, and we planted plants in them, and we made 2 for the LBJ Ranch, 2 for the Boys and Girls Club, and 2 to take home.
Great, great. So these were some native flowers that you planted and you took them home, and how are they doing?
They're doing real well. They're growing really, really good.
Cool. And everybody in your family, are they kind of helping out with your wild plants?
Yeah, they're helping a lot.
So everyone in the family is now a steward, huh? Because of you. High five. Back to you, Allison and Nadir.
Thanks, Greg and April.
So the Everglades is really lucky to have somebody who cares about it.
Yep, and let's find out a little bit more about stewardship and conservation and head over to Your Turn Central.
Hey guys, welcome back. Well, we've talked a lot about stewardship now and some conservation, and Devontae's mentioned water conservation a couple times here as ways that we can help the Everglades out. So to give you an idea about what kind of an impact that we have on the water that is in the Everglades, we're going to play a game called Sponging Off the Everglades. Now, I've got 2 tubs of water. This one right here represents the water that's been in the Everglades prior to human settlement around the area. So this is all the water that the Everglades had before people actually came here. This bucket right here represents all the water that's in the Everglades now. And what we're going to do is we're going to see how the activities of humans impact the water that's currently in the Everglades, and then we're going to talk about what's left over and how that can be used. Okay, so our two guys here, Peter and Devontae, they have cards that represent users of water out of the Everglades. And who are you, Peter?
I'm the farmers.
And Devontae, you're?
The population of South Florida.
Okay, so let's start. Peter, how much water do you think farmers might use out of the Everglade?
Probably a lot.
What do you think they're going to use it for?
To water their crops and probably to let their cattle and animals drink and then use it for themselves too.
Oh, use it. Maybe you want to put an extra squeeze in there for the stuff that they're going to use just for themselves, because they've got to take baths and get drinks of water and brush their teeth, right? Okay. Now, Devontae, you're the population of South Florida. What do you think people in South Florida might be using water for?
Showers.
Okay.
Drinking.
Mm-hmm. Maybe water in their gardens?
Yeah.
How about washing their cars?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, I think maybe they might use a little bit more than that. They got some big yards out here. What do you think? There you go, good. All right. Good deal. Wow. That's a lot of water. Check that out. That's a lot of water out of the Everglades. Lot of water that they're not available now for the plants and animals that live in the Everglades to use. So this is what's left for them. That's going to be not too much to survive on. Okay, and remember, we talked about needing to have food, water, and shelter. Without that water, we're not going to be in very good shape. So this, just to give you an idea of how much water the Everglades use, let's take a little bit out of the historic supply and see how that affects. So that would be about what the Everglades would use without people drawing water out of it. And look at all that water that's left that just the plants and animals would use. All right, so guys, what do you think? Should we be working on conservation efforts for the Everglades?
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, so we're gonna head on back to Allison and Nadir.
All right, thanks Flo, Peter, and Devontae. That's a great activity. Definitely one of my favorites.
So once again, I say, I guess it's lucky to have someone who care about this park.
It sure does help to have good stewards for this park, but we can always use a few more. And not every natural area has people that are focused on stewardship or worried about taking care of a place. What do you think happens when people neglect an area?
I think what happened is that certain area die out and nobody will help it out, and it will become like the environments in certain kind of places.
Right, okay, so yeah, we can get a lot of negative effects from lack of stewardship, I guess, and we might end up with trash in a place or graffiti or those invasive species again, and especially we can even get pets that end up in the Everglades. So that's kind of a curious thing. Let's go over to April and Greg to hear a little bit more about those invasive pets, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Well, look, we're joined now by Skip Snow, one of the biologists at the Everglades.
Hey, Greg.
Hey,
April.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. What we have here is thinking about what the Everglades would be like without stewards. As Allison said, it could be trashy, there could be graffiti, but without stewards, you know, the wrong animals from far away can get into a place, and it just doesn't have to be plants. It could be invasive fish, it could be a different type of invasive animal, and there are some pretty strange animals who are making their way into the Everglades, right?
Yes. So what do you have in the box right there?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I brought an example of a big and growing problem here in the Everglades. It's the exotic, non-native, invasive Burmese python, which is native to Southeast Asia, but brought over here from the pet trade, and now they're in the park.
So let's check it out. You feeling brave, April?
Yes.
Let me just get it so it won't get me. And this is our, there we go. Okay. So what do you think of that? You want to hold the little weight there? Great, perfect. So we've got this Burmese python.
How long do these actually get?
Oh, it's one of the few snakes in the world that sometimes are called giants, and they can get bigger than 20 feet. We found one that was as big as 16 feet in the Everglades.
So this one's pretty much still a baby, even though it's big, it's still pretty small.
Very much so, very much so. When they're babies, they're about 18 or 24 inches, but pretty soon they get 7 and 8, 9 feet in a couple of years, and they can get as big as I said, 20 feet. This is still just a young one.
What do they eat?
Oh, they like to eat all kinds of birds and mammals. Everything from small songbirds to wading birds that we care about, everything from our small native rats and raccoons, bobcats, even deer. And in fact, they also eat endangered species. We found the endangered key largo wood rat inside of Burmese pythons. And there's only about 100 or 200 of those left in the world.
So I'm kind of curious, how did a python from South Asia end up in South Florida? That's a big distance.
It's a long way away. They didn't fly here, and they didn't swim here, and they didn't blow in on hurricanes. What they did was they were brought over for the pet trade, and a very popular animal, bought by people who didn't ask enough questions ahead of time, and some of them could no longer keep the animal because it grew from a small pet to a really big pet. So what do I do with a big snake I can't keep? Well, they try and give it away, but no one wants it. They try and sell it, no one wants to buy it. So they look for a wild place and let it go. Enough of them have been let go that we now have them living and breeding in the park, and we have wild pythons like this one.
So they're becoming quite a problem in the Everglades. Should people be threatened for our safety, or what? Should I be worried?
Well, they don't hunt people in their native range. They're not known to hunt people for food like some animals, but they do have the tools. They have a mouthful of very sharp teeth and very strong coils that they can do some damage and have been known to kill pet owners. So they are something to pay attention to, just like a lot of our native wildlife, which you also need to be alert for.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think would be some advice to people who are thinking about getting fancy animals like that?
Clearly you need to be a responsible pet owner, and the first part of that is to ask questions. How big is my animal going to get? How long will my pet live? What will it eat? So you need to understand what you're getting into, and you need to own it for life to be a responsible pet owner and a good steward. And if for some reason you can't keep it, you have to find a good place for it, and above all, don't let it loose.
So it's just not pythons that can be a problem, it could be people's fish tanks and aquariums and things like that we need to be careful of.
Absolutely.
Right, well thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for asking.
Back to you, Allison and Nadir.
Thanks, Greg and April and Skip. Wow, that's pretty exciting to see that big a snake, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So let's recap what we learned about stewardship.
All right, well, clearly from the incident or the issue with the python, we've definitely learned that prevention is one of the best ways to be a good steward in the Everglades and other natural areas. Let's head over to Your Turn Central real quick and see what they learned from their activity.
Hey, that's a pretty big snake. Wouldn't want to meet that one in the dark, that's for sure. Guys, what did we learn about conservation today?
I learned how important water conservation is.
How about you?
Same as Peter said, you just need to save more water.
And you know what? If you want to be good stewards, be sure to be talking about this to all your friends and families and your neighbors, because you can be educators about conservation and stewardship too. Back to you, Allison and Nadir.
Thanks, Peter, Flo, and Devante. All right, well, definitely stewardship is something that we can all do and we can all take a part in, whether it be big or small. We're ready to take a few more of your questions, and so please keep them coming. We have Jose from Nevada on the line. Jose, please go ahead with your question.
Hello?
Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is, if a hurricane hits, how would it affect animals and plants?
That's a great question, Jose. If a hurricane hits, how would it affect animals and plants? Honestly, most of the plants and animals here are pretty well adapted to hurricanes, and hurricanes are very much a part of the natural flow of the ecosystem here. And many of those animals will hunker down and find a good place to hide to last out the hurricane. And some of our trees are actually really flexible so they can bend in the wind. All right, thanks, Jose, for that question. Next up is Haley from Nevada. Please go ahead with your question.
Me and my classmates in science were wondering what is the highest and the lowest temperatures you get in the Everglades?
Great question. The highest and lowest temperatures in the Everglades, I think we can go ahead and answer that too. Highest temperatures, I live here year-round, so definitely in the summer we kind of max out around 92 or 93 degrees, but that's with 100% humidity. And we very rarely get below or even down to freezing. So every few years maybe we get an event where it gets below 32 degrees, but not for very long. So I'd say our lows, very lows, are in the mid to upper 30s. Thanks for your question. Brett from Illinois, I believe you are next up. What is your question?
We heard about invasive plants. What other invasive animals are in the Everglades?
What other invasive animals are in the Everglades? Let's toss that over to Greg and April and Skip to answer.
Well, that's a great question about what are some of the other invasive animals. There's a lot of invasive fish that have made their way into the Everglades from people releasing them from fish tanks into canals. There's even different types of rodents that can get up to 6 or 7 pounds. There's a lot of different invasive animals around the place that are coming into the Everglades now. That's a great question. Thank you. Back to you, Allison.
Thanks, guys.
All this stuff that helps around our Earth Day still makes me think about what could we do?
All right, I hope everybody's going to go home and do a couple of things for Earth Day today to help out. All right, let's take our next bunch of callers. G from Nevada, please go ahead with your question. You're next on the line.
We're reporting from Miss Boyd's class from Fez Middle. Plants could be considered endangered.
I didn't quite catch all that. Do you mind repeating it, please?
We're reporting from Miss Boyd's class in Fez Middle School. We're wondering if plants could be considered endangered.
That's a great question. Most definitely plants can be considered endangered, and we have quite a few of those here in the Everglades. Brandon from Nevada, go ahead with your question, please. We're standing by.
School, we're wondering what were the rarest snakes over there?
Ooh.
What were the rarest snakes?
Okay, it sounded like what are the rarest snakes over here? Let's send that over to Greg and April and Skip to help answer.
Hey, that's a pretty good question. One of the rarest snakes we have, and in fact it's endangered, is the eastern indigo. It's a very beautiful snake and pretty docile, but it is endangered. Thanks for your question.
Okay, let's hear the next question up. Giselle from Florida, please go ahead and ask your question now.
Giselle? Hi, I'm Giselle. I want to know how old is Everglades?
Wow, that's a good question. How old is the Everglades? Any chance you know?
I would have to say no.
Okay. The Everglades as an ecosystem is about 5,000 years old. So as ecosystems go, that's a pretty young ecosystem, but to us, that seems like a very long time. Thanks for your question. Next up is going to be Paul from Florida. Go ahead with your question, please.
In the Everglades that are predators.
Do the Everglades
Hello?
have?
Yes? Try it one more time, please.
How many species do you have in the Everglades that are predators?
Boy, that's kind of a tough question. I've never quite thought about how many species of predators we might have in the Everglades. I'm going to suggest you go online to our bank of experts and post that one for them to answer, because in some sense, almost everything turns out to be a predator of something. Thanks. Enola from Nevada, I believe your question is going to be next, and yours is the last call, so please go ahead with your question.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Enola from Fez Middle School. We want to know what's the most dangerous animal that lives in the Everglades.
What's the most dangerous animal in the Everglades? I think maybe we should ask Skip. He's our biologist on staff.
Well, that's a tough question. It kind of depends on if you mean something that might bite you or eat you, or something that might give you a disease. It all kind of depends. But we do have a number of animals that are poisonous, a number of snakes that are poisonous, and we have animals that can give you a pretty bad bite. So you do need to be aware no matter what. You need to be alert when you're out and about.
Thanks, Skip. Great answer. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, so much for those great questions. I think we've all learned a lot about the Everglades today, haven't we?
Yes, and I would like to give a special thanks to Ball State University.
Actually, first, I think we better go check back in with Greg and April and Skip, and I think they have a few more ideas for us on making a difference on Earth Day.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, think about today as more than just a TV show. The field trip is a call to action. And the things that we can learn about on Earth Day, we can use for the rest of our lives to making the planet a better place. We can all do little things around the home, around the place, that can make the planet better and better. And you know what? One of the things we can do, children, I want you to check out your local Macy's store today. There are these books, these activity packs that the kids pack. You can pick up these books today. On the back of them, there's a coloring in. Take it to the Macy's store on the weekend and you get yourself a kid's power patch. And April, you've got some ideas about what individuals can do to make a difference, right?
Yes, you can probably plant some native plants and native trees, and you can pick up a lot of the garbage that people throw on the ground that are near parks.
Yeah, and April, you said something really powerful and really important about planet Earth. Can you share that with everybody?
Well, we all share the same planet Earth, and we can all turn over a new leaf by helping this planet.
Back to you, Allison.
Great. Thanks, Greg and April. Those are some great ideas for Earth Day. Hey, Nadir, is there something special you might go home and do now that you've learned more about being a good steward for the environment?
Yes, I will go home and go to my National Historic Park and still help out the environment.
Awesome. So glad to hear it.
And I would like to give special thanks to Ball State University, Macy's, National Park Foundation, National Park Service, and the First Bloom. Woohoo!
All right, that sounds great. Again, thanks so much for joining us today on this electronic field trip. We sure learned a lot, and we hope you did too. And please do go out and find out a little bit more about invasives and habitat restoration in your area. All right. Bye-bye. Happy Earth Day.